first is that strategy matters. The conventional wisdom these days seems to be that execution is all that matters. If you get the right team, you work the problem right, you're going to come to the right solution. Well, we looked at these 750 companies in detail. Going in, we thought that maybe 1 of 4, maybe 1 in 5 would turn out to be as a result of a strategy that could have been identified as a bad strategy at the time. In fact, it was almost 1 in 2. And we were very careful as we went through this, because the last thing we wanted to do was have people say that they thought we were benefiting from hindsight. So for instance, we were happy to blame Kodak for its problems because, first of all, they saw the problems coming in 1981. Actually, as part of this Buffett book I reviewed the other day, I found that Bill Gates had told Buffett in 1991 that Kodak was toast. So there were signs out there. People saw that these problems were coming. Well, we were happy to blame Kodak because AGFA and Fuji played the situation much better than Kodak did. But for instance, we didn't blame the airlines for the problems they had after 9/11 because who knew? So anyway, the first insight is that strategy really is at the core of a lot of the problems that companies have. The second starts to get a little more detailed. When we went through all this research, we found that failures were often associated with 1 of 7 strategies. We aren't saying that these strategies never succeed, because clearly they do. If you look at number 5, adjacencies, for instance, General Electric did a great job for a long time under Jack Welch of moving into adjacent markets. They would say, all right, we shouldn't just be a manufacturer of jet engines. We're really about keeping airplanes maintained properly and in the air as much as possible so you don't have these expensive assets sitting on the ground. So they added all sorts of service around the manufacture of the jet engines. They called it power by the hour, and they made a lot of money. But if you look, there are these 7 strategies that often led to problems. With synergies, it's a great idea. People think, all right, if 1 + 1 = 3, then this is a great thing. But often 1 + 1 = 1. One of my favorite examples of this is Sears, which decided back in the mid-'80s that they were going to have what they called a socks and stocks strategy. So in addition to selling the white work socks or whatever, they bought Dean Witter. They thought that somehow people would want to go into a Sears and find a stockbroker to give them financial advice. They also bought Coldwell Banker, because they didn't seem to understand that if people are picking a realtor, they're picking somebody they trust, or maybe these days they're trying to find somebody who can still make a business as a realtor. But in any case, they had this idea that you could combine these things and it would work. In fact, it didn't, and Sears sold off both Dean Witter and Coldwell Banker, which actually both separately wound up as part of other synergy plays, and those didn't work out terribly well either. But in Sears' case, it actually didn't lose a ton of money because the individual businesses still had value. But there was a huge opportunity cost because there was this little company started by this guy named Sam Walton down in Arkansas that was about to eat Sears' lunch. And Sears was spending all its time worrying about whether people would buy stocks with their socks rather than worrying about Walmart. Financial engineering is one that has come up a lot these days, and it's part of the reason the book is getting so much attention. The big story we tell there in the book is absolutely an analog for what's happened with the subprime lenders. It's about a company called Green Tree Financial that had this brainstorm in the 90s. They sold mortgages for mobile homes, and they thought, okay, people typically are selling 15-year mortgages. Why don't we do something bright, and we'll offer 30-year mortgages? Problem is that mobile homes have a useful life of 10 to 15 years. 30-year mortgages don't work so well on 10 to 15-year assets. You would wind up with situations where after 3 or 4 years, a borrower would have an asset worth $25,000 and would still owe $49,000 on it. Defaults happen. The reason it's an analogy to what's going on at the moment is that Green Tree made all its money off loan origination, so it was entirely a volume game. There was no incentive for somebody to make sure that the loan was still going to be working 10 or 15 or 30 years down the road. You actually had dealers who would make $10,000 typically off the sale of a $50,000 mobile home, who would say, all right, you don't have the down payment. That's okay. You probably have a gun at home. Go ahead and bring the gun in. And then they'd buy this worthless gun for $2,000, and that would be the down payment on the mobile home. So that had a bad ending. It actually even had a doubly bad ending because Conseco came in, bought Greentree, not understanding the market and getting railroaded into doing a lot of stupid things in terms of due diligence. And Conseco went bankrupt in what was the third largest bankrupt in the history of the US at that point. Somehow everybody missed those lessons. You know, it's not like this was a small problem at the time. But if you look, those problems are absolutely what are playing out now with the subprime lenders, and then also the guys who wound up investing in the securities that came out of those subprime loans.